Hello and welcome to the Stitchopedia. This is Jessie of Jessie at Home. In this video I'm going to teach you how to make the spider stitch, which is a stitch pattern using a single crochet and a chain stitch. So you just need to know how to make a single crochet and a chain stitch and you will be able to make this stitch pattern. It's a stitch pattern that I'm very fond of. I've been using it for a very long time. I only recently learned the name, but I have been using it for quite some time. The yarn that I'm using in this video is Vanna's Choice yarn from Lion Brand, and I am using an eye crochet hook. Of course, you can make this with the weight yarn that you want and the hook that goes well with the yarn that you have. I'm just doing it with this combination because it shows up well for you. To get started on this stitch, you need to chain an even number. Now I do want to let you know that I do the beginning and the ends of my rows for this stitch a little differently than what my I have some vintage stitch pattern books, and that's how I actually learned the name of the stitch. But my starts and ends of my rows are a little different than theirs are. I'm going to show you the way that I do it because I really like the way that it looks that way, and I like the edge that it gets. But when I'm done with the tutorial here, I'm going to tell you how the vintage stitch books say to do it. I'm also going to tell you what to do if you want to start with a row of foundation single crochet instead of a starting row of chains. So we will get to that at the end of the video. But for now, we're just going to teach you the basic spider stitch the way that I like to make it. And you start off with a chain of an even number of stitches. Your base needs to have an even number of stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That'll be good. And now what you're going to do is you're going to skip the very first stitch and you're going to start working in the second stitch. You're going to place a single crochet, chain 1, single crochet in the second stitch. So we skip 1, go into the second one. Single, chain, single. And now you're going to continue that across. Skip 1 and then single, chain, single all the way across. And that's all that the first row is. Skip 1 and then single, chain, single. Now you can see that I'm working my stitches into the bottom loops of this chain. You work your stitches into whatever part of the chains you like. Okay, did I forget my chain there? No, I didn't. It just looked like I did. That's what happens when I talk and crochet at the same time. Sometimes I make mistakes and sometimes I just think I made them. You work your stitch into whatever part of the chain you like to work your stitch into, or if you have a pattern that uses the stitch and specifies, and go ahead and do what the pattern says. I just like using the bottom loops of my starting chain when I'm making something. So I'm skipping 1 and then single, chain, single into the next. Single, chain, single. Skip 1, single, chain, single into the very last stitch. Single, chain, and whoopsie, and single. Okay, there you have the first row. Now this is going to even out as we go. However, if you make your starting chains really tight, if you tend to chain really tight, there are two options here. You can actually add in an extra chain in between each of these stitches so that you're skipping 2 and you'll have to, do your math. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little stitches, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces in between, so we would have had to add an additional 5 stitches to get that extra little skipped stitch in between. So that is one option, is just skipping 2 stitches in between each of your single chain singles instead of just 1. And the other option is to use a larger hook for your starting chain, which is usually the option I like to go with because it doesn't require having to redo all of the numbers. I just use a larger hook if I find that my starting chain is making everything curl too much. But you can see that this one will actually straighten out once we get more rows going. It's not actually all that tight. Now that we've completed row 1, we are going to turn, and row 2 is going to be the row that we repeat until we have this to our desired length. So all you need to do is turn your work, and then what I do is I just kind of pull the loop a little taller than I normally would, and I go into that very first chain, the last chain that I made, which is now the first chain since we've turned, and I work my single chain single. I do not make a turning chain. Single chain single, and then you find your next chain stitch right here. You find your next chain and you work a single without splitting your yarn, single chain single. Find your next chain, single chain single, and you keep doing that all the way across. Here's my next chain. It's in between the singles, single chain single. Find the next one, single chain single, and the last single. You know what, I think I actually split, I did that into a single crochet and not into a chain. No, actually it was in the right place. Sometimes it's hard to see that. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see where the actual chain stitch is. You might just have to finagle things a bit. And then we're going to turn and do the same thing. Go find your very first chain stitch and work single chain single. Continue that all the way across. Single chain single, and we've gotten to the end of our third row at this point. And you're just going to continue in this pattern, doing the single chain singles into every single chain all the way across until you have this at your desired height. So now while I work a few more rows here, and I know I can always skip over to get to the end for you, but I'm also going to tell you a few things that you might like to know. If you would like to start this stitch pattern with a foundation single crochet row, you may certainly do that. Or if you're going to start the stitch pattern working on top of another stitch pattern, what you need is you just need to have an even number of stitches. You place your first single chain single into the second stitch, then you skip one, then single chain single into the next, and so on. Skip one, single chain single, skip one, single chain single, all the way across. And that is all you would need to do to work this stitch pattern, the first row of this stitch pattern, into a foundation single crochet row or into another another stitch pattern. Maybe you're making a little dress for a little girl and the top isn't all, you know, single crochet or all double crochet or something, and then you want to make the skirt in this pattern. All you need to do is make sure that the last row of the top has an even number of stitches, and you'll be able to do this. This stitch transitions into the round very, very nicely, because all you need to do is, again, start off with an even number and single chain single into every other stitch, and then on the next round you're just single chain single into every single chain, and continuing that all the way around. And so it is very, very easy to transition into an in the round pattern. Obviously, if you're working in the round and you're not turning in between each round, it will look a tiny bit different because stitches look different on the front and the back. So when you work in the round and you don't turn, you're always seeing one side of the stitch and not the other. And then the last thing I said I wanted to tell you was how my vintage stitch pattern books teach me to do the turns. They have you actually use a starting chain 2. So on the very first row, instead of placing the single chain single into the second stitch from the hook, you actually would place it into the third stitch from the hook. Then when you get to the end, there'll be one stitch left, and they have you place a single crochet into that last stitch. Then all of the following rows, they have you start with a chain 2, put a single chain single into every single chain space, and then end with a single crochet into the turning chain of the previous row. That is how my vintage stitch pattern books have the stitch done. But when you do that, if you look at this, the sides, they're a little bit wobbly, but not too much. When you do that with the way that my vintage stitch pattern books say to do, it's a little bit more bumpy on the sides. I really like the look that this gets when I just start my first single crochet without any sort of a starting chain. You just go with it, and it's okay if it seems a little tight or whatever, because you don't actually work into that first single crochet later. You're working into the chain space, so it actually works out really nicely just doing the single chain singles all the way across, and you don't have to worry about turning chains or anything like that. This is how I prefer to do it, so this is what I'm teaching you. Right, but of course you take this knowledge that you've learned and you use it however you see fit. One other variation, and I do not know if it maybe has a name all its own, that I will sometimes use if I want something to have a little bit more openness to it, is instead of putting one chain between the singles, I'll put 2 chains. It does obviously change the look a tiny bit, and it also will change the height of your stitches. You'll have less rows in the same 10 inches of that pattern than you would of this pattern, because it actually kind of pulls up a little bit more. So if you like this stitch pattern but you want it to have a little bit more of a lacy look, do 2 chains instead of 1. Okay, so let me finish this row, and I'll then kind of show you so you can see what it looks like when we have a few more rows completed. Here we go. So here you have the spider stitch that is simply single chain single, and you work that into all of the chain 1 spaces. I hope this was helpful to you. Have a nice day.